This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. Wall Street Bank's commodities trading exposures are rising, which could leave them vulnerable to large swings in asset values following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, first quarter earnings disclosures showed. Goldman Sachs Group Inc. and JP Morgan Chase & County both reported an uptick in a commodities trading risk measure, with Goldman's now the highest in a decade, according to a Reuters review of bank filings. Oil, gas, wheat and precious metals markets have grown more volatile since Russia invaded Ukraine and Western countries imposed sanctions on Russian trade. But results so far suggest that banks are managing the risk effectively.
Oil rose on Monday in choppy trade, with Brent crude topping $113 a barrel, as outages in Libya deepened concern over tight global supply and the Ukraine crisis dragged on, offsetting concern over slowing Chinese demand. Adding to supply pressures from sanctions on Russia, Libya's National Oil Corp on Monday warned a painful wave of closures had begun hitting its facilities and declared force majeure at Al-Sharara oilfield and other sites. With global supplies now so tight, even the most minor disruption is likely to have an outsized impact on prices, said Jeffrey Haley, analyst at brokerage OANDA.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
China refined 2% less oil in March than a year earlier, with throughput falling to its lowest level since October as a surge in crude oil prices squeezed margins and tight COVID-19 lockdowns hurt fuel consumption. Refining volume last month was 58.59 million tons, equivalent to 13.8 million barrels per day, BPD, data from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, showed on Monday. That compares with 14.08 million barrels of oil per day in March 2021 and 13.98 million barrels of oil per day in the January to February period this year. Global crude oil benchmarks soared to nearly $140 a barrel in early March over fears of supply disruption following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The price rise hurt refining margins. Russia calls its actions in Ukraine a special operation.
Saudi Arabia's crude exports in February rose to 7.307 million barrels per day, BPD, the highest level since April 2020, official data showed on Monday. Crude oil exports in February rose 4.4% from about 7 million barrels of oil per day reported for January. The world's largest oil exporter's February crude production also rose to its highest level in nearly 2 years at 10.225 million barrels of oil per day from 10.145 million barrels of oil per day in the previous month. Saudi Arabia's domestic crude refinery throughput fell 0.271 million barrels of oil per day to 2.506 million barrels of oil per day in February, while direct crude burn fell 111,000 barrels of oil per day to 291,000 barrels of oil per day.
Next, we have the top news in metal markets.
Gold rose more than 1% to a one-month high on Monday as concerns around the Russia-Ukraine conflict and rising inflationary pressures increased safe haven bids for the precious metal. Spot gold rose 0.9% to $1,993.07 per ounce by 10:01 a.m. Eastern Time, 14:01 GMT, after earlier hitting its highest since March 11. U.S. gold futures gained 1% to $1,994.70. The little step up in tension due to the Russia-Ukraine war with inflationary pressures across the board boosts safe haven demand for gold, said David Megger, director of metals trading at High Ridge Futures.
China's crude steel output fell more than 6% in March from the same month a year earlier, data from the Statistics Bureau showed on Monday, as production at mills was crimped by COVID-19 outbreaks and environmental restrictions. The world's top steel producer made 88.3 million tons of the metal last month, down from 94.02 million tons in March 2021, said the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. Average daily output in March stood at 2.85 million tons, according to Reuters calculation based on the NBS data. That was down from 3.03 million tons in the same month last year, but up from 2.68 million tons in January to February. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. Russian wheat export prices rose last week amid active supplies from the country's Black Sea ports. Some supplies from the Azov Sea and higher global prices for wheat in Chicago WK2, analysts said on Monday. Exports are active, but there are some signs of weakening, Dmitry Rilko, the head of the IKAR agriculture consultancy, said. Russia, one of the world's largest wheat exporters, continues exporting its commodity despite the Western sanctions imposed on Moscow over the Ukraine crisis that have complicated trade logistics and payments.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.